G'day and welcome back to My Cupcake Addiction, where today I'll be showing you how to make this awesome, simple to make, simple to serve Dora the Explorer Pullapart cupcake cake. Tools and equipment that we will be using today. I've got some Pocky. Now if you don't have Pocky, essentially that's just a pretzel stick which you can dip in chocolate, so that will give you almost exactly the same result. I've got a little bit of fondant. Now the fondant that I'm using today is like a caramelly colour. You can also use softened caramels for this if you don't have access to fondant, and I've got a spare Ziploc bag. I've got my Dora the Explorer figurines, so I just picked up one with Dora, Swiper and Boots. It was about $10 at my local Kmart. I'm using some of our perfectly pipeable buttercream frosting in green, and I've got that in a disposable piping bag. You can pair that with any piping tip you like. I'll leave a link to the Cupcake Addiction frosting recipe in the description box below. I've also got some of that frosting in blue and yellow. I've got some crushed shortbread cookies. I've got some just treasure that I'm using as the end result for our Dora cake today. So I've just gone for gold and silver chocolate coins as the treasure that Dora and Boots are seeking out. I've pre-made some little fondant flowers. So I've just made these using a little fondant plunge cutter. And you can make your own flowers. Otherwise you can buy packets of flower-shaped sprinkles, or you can buy pre-made icing flowers from most decorating shops. I've got a pair of scissors. I'm using an offset spatula and a sharp knife. I've got a 12-inch by 18-inch cake board, and I've iced that using some green fondant. I've got a tutorial which shows you how to ice a cake board, which I will also link to in the description box below. And of course you'll need cupcakes today. So today I'm using 24, which I've baked in just a selection of green and brown cupcake liners, and I've positioned those in 6 rows of 4 for my 24 cupcakes. So let's get started. Once you're happy with the positioning of your cupcakes, you need to stick them to the board. So I just use a little dollop of buttercream frosting on the bottom of each cupcake. This sticks them to the board and it allows easier transportation when you're moving this cake around. You want to make sure that your cupcakes are positioned as close together as they can. So once you've finished putting on all of your buttercream frosting, just use your hands to sort of compact them together, because the more tightly packed they are, the easier your frosting will be. Alright, now it's time to mark out your river. So I sort of want my river to go about 2/3 of the way down the board and then coming into the middle of the board. So I always mark my cupcakes out with just a little dollop of that blue frosting, and that way if I make a mistake I can always go back and just change where the cupcake's going to be positioned. Once you've marked them out, you just want to kind of just smush your icing back and forward just to give it a really nice coating of that blue buttercream frosting. Now once you're happy that you've coated all of your cupcakes, and make sure that you're getting that frosting all the way over the edges of the cupcake. You don't want to see any brown cupcake poking through around the edges of your pull-apart cake. I just go back and forward with the tip of that spatula and give it a little bit of watery texture. Now once your water's done, it's time to mark out our little garden path that Dora and Boots are going to be following to the treasure. So I've got my yellow cupcake, which is where my ultimate treasure is going to be hidden. And once again, I'm just going to mark out my path just with one row of cupcakes going up to the river and then over the other side of the river, heading towards that little treasure trove that they're all looking for. With this one, once again, just mark it out, push down your icing, make sure that you smooth it off as best as you can, but don't worry too much about this being too neat. Once you've got your little frosting path all marked out, grab some of those shortbread crumbs and you just want to pat them down on the surface to give it kind of like a dirt appeal. If you don't have shortbread, you can use any white biscuit you like. I think these are actually Anzac cookies here from Australia. So whatever colour you want your path to be, it doesn't really matter. Whatever plain white biscuits you've got in the cupboard, just pop them in the food processor or smash them up with a rolling pin. Now it's time to get started on the grass. So as I mentioned before, it doesn't matter what sort of a piping tip you've got. Basically, I'm using a star. You can use a round, any piping tip will do, but I'm just doing one of our low, smooth styles of swirl. So if you're not familiar with how to swirl a great cupcake, I'll leave a link to that tutorial in the description box below. And you can see there I'm basically just swirling across each cupcake. If you've got any gaps like these, you can either fill them with frosting, otherwise you can put like a marshmallow or something in there, and that's just to stop your frosting from falling through the gaps as your cake starts to set or as you transport it. Don't worry if this is not too neat, it's not your final coat. Now to get our grass-like effect, I initially started with my offset spatula and basically I'm just patting it onto the frosting and using it to lift the frosting up a little bit to give us a bit of a textured grass effect. I actually ended up changing to my sharp knife because I found it just a little bit of a better texture. The point of the sharp knife just gave me a bit more of a defined grass look. This is a lot easier than using, say, a grass tip to pipe out that amount of space. It will take you forever. So it's just a really quick, easy way to get that kind of grassed effect. Once you've finished doing all of your grass, it's time to move on and we're going to start adding our treasure. Now I just went with little chocolate gold and silver coins for my treasure, but obviously you can choose any treasure that you think your little birthday girl or boy would prefer to find at the end of their Dora adventure. I'm using a little bit of buttercream frosting in between each of my coins, and that's to stick them together because there's going to be a little stack of them, and the last thing that I want as I transport this cake is for that little stack of coins to all topple over and go falling off the side of the cake. So just positioning them like a neat little stack. I also had one of these little racing flags that I found in my cake decorating cupboard, so that's a great way to mark out the finish if you want to pop a little bunting flag or a little flag just to mark it out as the end. Moving on to our bridge. Now you want to take either your caramel coloured fondant or your actual caramel chews that you've softened in the microwave, and you just want to roll them. If you're using fondant, roll it into one long sausage. If you're using caramel chews, just roll them into little individual sausages because they'll be a bit harder to work with. Slice off either end because these are naturally going to be a little bit chunkier than the rest of your snake or your sausage, and roll those out into 2 fine little snakes. These are going to make sort of the underside of our bridge, so make sure they're the right length and then just lay them out from path to path going over your river. Once you've got your 2 little bridge structural supports in place, cut your snake into 6 or 7 even pieces, however many you can get out of it. Make sure that your first piece is actually wide enough to cover over the 2 smaller support pieces, and then just use a second piece to kind of use as a guide so that you get all of your bridge pieces roughly the same size. Just get as many as you can, and you are going to have to roll out a couple of these snakes of fondant to get all of the bridge that you need to go across your river, depending on how wide you've decided to make it. Just lay your little bridge pieces over so that they're covering right over top of those 2 little support sides. You want to put a little bit more of that green buttercream frosting into a Ziploc bag and just snip the tip off. So just make sure your bag's completely sealed, snip the tip off. It doesn't really matter how fine or how wide you've got it. You can see here I'm just using it to make kind of a little bit of a siding effect for our path, just up and down with that Ziploc bag to give it a little bit of texture. It just defines the path a little bit, and then to define it even more, I'm going to take a few of our little fondant flowers and just scatter them along that path siding. If you ever watch Dora, and I watch a lot of Dora, you'll notice that there's these little flowers scattered everywhere. Moving on to the trees. Now, I will mention here that you want quite a firm frosting for the tops of your trees. So I actually took some of my regular perfectly pipeable buttercream frosting that I had in that green piping bag, popped it back in a bowl, added in an extra half a cup of icing sugar and whizzed it through before I popped it into the Ziploc bag. That's just to give it a really nice firm consistency, and it's just going to make sure that your frosting doesn't slide down the trees. You want to position those trees into the cupcakes, and you do want to be careful here not to position them into those gaps in between the cupcakes. You want each tree to go into actual cake, not into that kind of frosted space in between. You just want to repeat this until you've got a nice little pocket of trees to make your little Dora the Explorer forest, which is going to be one of the things that Dora and Boots are going to have to pass by on their way to find the treasure. Now on the way to the treasure, Swiper is always hiding somewhere, usually in the bushes or behind the trees. I was going to initially do these as a big blob of frosting, and then I thought, you know what kid wants that much frosting on a cupcake? So I just grabbed a couple of marshmallows, popped them down, and then just squiggled some green frosting on top so there's not as much frosting, but it still builds them up in that nice bushy effect. I used 3 marshmallows, so 2 on the bottom layer and 1 on the top layer for this particular bush, just to make it a little bit taller because Swiper is going to be sort of sneakily half disguised hiding behind it. Once you're happy that you've got all of your little squiggles and you can't see any of that marshmallow poking through, you want to take some more of your little pink flowers and we're just going to pop them on like a little flowery bush. So just haphazardly across there just to give it a little bit of colour and just define it as a bush. Perfect, it's time to position our figurines. Of course, Swiper's going to go sneakily behind that bush, waiting to pounce to steal the treasure just after Dora and Boots get it. And then I'm going to pop Dora and Boots somewhere at the start of the garden path. Once they're down, I'm just going to add in a few more of my little pink flowers around the edges of the path. Once again, this is just to add a little bit of colour, but it also disguises any areas that you're not particularly happy with. I also decided at the last minute that the front section of my cake needed a little something else, so just using a couple more marshmallows, a bit of frosting and some flowers, I added in another bush. So there you've got your completed Dora the Explorer Pullapart cupcake cake. If you're having a Dora party, make sure that you check out these really simple push pops that my niece made over on her channel, Charlie's Crafty Kitchen. I'll leave a link to those in the description box below. And if you've loved this video, make sure that you give it a thumbs up, maybe share it on your social media, and don't forget to subscribe to My Cupcake Addiction for 3 times weekly uploads. Thanks very much for watching.